Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our morning coffee time for Thursday, June the 18th, I believe. So let's see who's all here this morning. 53. How are you all? It is a gloriously sunny day here in White Salmon, which is nice. Everything is looking lush. The days and nights are relentlessly passing, and the mornings seem to just fly by. So, uh, from the time my morning meditation ends and I do a little message triage and get things sort of set up. My intention is to be here and sit for a few minutes quietly before the stream starts, but oftentimes it's not much more than a few seconds. So, first of all, there's several people have emailed me the last kind of few days, and it's beautiful to hear something from you all and how your practice is. And of course, it's always nice to feel appreciated for what it is that we're offering here at the Hermitage and how it fits into people's lives. So I want to continue to encourage that. I don't teach over the phone and email, though. So please don't. You can say that you're interested in various subjects or share your experience or whatnot, but please don't ask me for practice advice in that way. It's a standard that I set up for myself a long time ago. One, because I want to focus on the people that I'm living with and that surround me in my community. It's a limit that helps support me as a monastic and supports some sense of limits and solitude. So, and I do make myself available in various ways, including here. So if you do have questions, bring them here. If you have topic suggestions or concerns, feedback, appreciation, sincere, constructive criticism, all that stuff's great. And I love it. So, and I read it all. So, and usually I do respond in some way. Sometimes it's a brief thank you, or I found that touching, or good point. Sometimes a little paragraph here or there. But if you email me questions and they don't get answered, that's the reason why. So, I spend enough time on a computer already. That's another reason why. So, let's see what else. Yesterday I had a wonderful chat with Lumpur Pasano, Ajahn Sona, Ajahn Jayanto, Ajahn Jaganando, Ajahn Karunadhammo. Have some regularly scheduled chats with the senior monks that are in positions of responsibility at the various monasteries we have here in North America. So, and something I started a while ago because like many people, there's always this intention to kind of reach out and connect. But I find for me, if I don't have some sort of make a commitment or a regular schedule, the gaps are long. So we have a regular kind of informal check-in with each other every so often, and especially during this time where all of our communities are dealing with the pandemic and everything else that's going on in the world. It's nice to hear where people are at and how their communities are faring, the different choices they're making. So, yeah, let's see what else. also, if you look at the very top of the chat, I posted a couple links that someone sent me, alerting me to Ajahn Saro's guided meditation and Q&A session with the Buddhist group at Stanford that happened, I believe it was last week, or almost a week ago. So if you scroll up, it's at the top of the chat window. So okay, 81 people. I think I'm going to consider everybody who wants to be here is here. Reflecting a little bit on the theme of listening this morning. The two dominant sense faculties we have are sight and hearing, seeing and hearing, sight and sound. And every once in a while, I like to meditate on sense consciousness or attend just to sense consciousness in a way of just exploring that. And one that I like to return to again and again in my meditation is attending to listening just in a way that's very open. And I've developed a few skillful means around that I find useful in my practice. Probably the one I turn to most is when I sit down sometimes and the mind is very restless and diverse, lots of different thoughts and impressions and stuff. This is oftentimes like at the end of the day, having been engaged in so many different things. When I sit down, the mind just seems to be bubbling. And sometimes when it is bubbling at a very, like it's a roiling boil, it's not just a bubble. When it's at a roiling boil, let's call it that, I find it challenging just to resolve that in a very quick and efficient way. And one of the things I often find very useful when it's in that state, rather than trying to sort of force the mind, is instead like open up and just create space to like listen to it in a very open, non-reactive way. Almost like being in a public space and just taking in the ambience of sound. You're not trying to listen to any particular thing like the birds or the sounds of the cars or the sounds of the wind or the conversation that's happening just a short distance away, but rather just listening. Whatever, like the feeling of sound waves striking the ear. I think of it as like this kind of open listening, with a particular effort not to cling, not to feed any of the perceptions that might arise. Trying to sort of strip it down to the raw experience of just being with the faculty of sound and listening and sound waves striking the eardrum, and whatever feelings, physical feelings, vibration, perceptions, thought formations that are arising in the experience of sound consciousness. It's like I'm sure people can relate to this. It's like sometimes when you're in a crowd or you're sitting in a cafe or something and your mind just pulls back into a state of awareness, you're able to sort of take in just the raw experience of listening. And various things might kind of pull your attention out, and the mind's doing its work, um, using memory and discrimination to sort of build sankharas and impressions, maybe even moving to like and dislike. Um, Somehow I find that posture um, is very skillful in relating to discursive thought, this kind of non-reactive, just open listening. And just that posture is a nice little preliminary meditation to start to allow um, the mind to become kind of conscious of what's going on, but there's an effort not to get engaged or react to it. And then also uh, the stability of just trying to attend to that starts to move the mind towards a more whole experience. You might say the mind seems to slow down, or the discursiveness then seems to sort of start to slow down or resolve itself. And then I'll oftentimes turn to the breath, or turn to a chosen object of meditation to further the practice and further refine it. But I also find it interesting, sort of like what the act of listening, like how the act of listening um, what an act of concentration it is, really. Like, in particular, when you, well, I think of it as kind of like open listening. Like when you hear a sound that you can't immediately identify, um, the mind generally uh, wants to move to recognize and identify it. Like this kind of happens just in your house sometimes. There's all these sounds that you're familiar with. You've habituated to the environment, the hum of the fridge, the buzz of a light bulb. You know what it sounds like. Like I even know what it sounds like when certain people drive down our gravel driveway. Like when the UPS guy's coming, the gravel has a certain crunch, uh, and the motor has a certain sound. Um, just the other night when we were meditating, right in the middle of the chanting, a truck pulled up to the monastery, and I, in my mind immediately sort of thought, that's a truck. It's awfully quiet. Doesn't sound like the UPS truck. Who's here? Starts creating stories. Um, and I think it's interesting as an experiment, or as a practice, just exploring listening to see if we can relax that faculty of the mind uh, that is so active in creating uh, sankharas, like taking the raw experience of sound and turning it into mental formations through memory and identification. And of course, like, that activity happens so fluid, easy, subconscious even, which is oftentimes highlighted when we encounter something that on some reason the mind can't recognize, and then also it moves from some what we might call sort of the periphery of consciousness to the fore, because the mind can't easily recognize it as the familiar and and ignore it. It needs to know. Like, so when there's certain low rumble, what's that? Is thunder on the way? Um, did something just crash into the side of the house? Um, so, uh, as an experiment in consciousness and an experiment in exploring sort of um, perception, thought formation, sankharas, uh, and how, in particular, it's interesting how memory and volition plays a role in that. So if I go back to the experience of, if I'm expecting a package and I'm excited about something that's being sent to the monastery, and I hear a truck, then it's not just a neutral experience. There's maybe like desire and attachment, wish, expectation, maybe even anger. Should have been here 3 days ago. Uh, all that kind of feeds into the creation of sankhara, and in particular, like taking this listening posture with a particular focus or effort on trying to just keep the mind in its most still and essential uh, establishment of paying attention to sense awareness or something. One really can kind of explore uh, something of how the mind works, how perception in particular and volition and sankhara come to be. And it's particularly it's particularly interesting to me to explore how difficult it is to suspend this process of identification, which is laden with our cares, our interests, our concerns, our desires. Um, Said another way, it's difficult to keep an open mind about things. So I find encountering a strange sight, but more importantly, a strange sound, is a very interesting experience. Like, especially when you're out in the wilderness or in nature, and you hear a sound, immediately mind wants to identify it, especially if it's the sound of another animal or something uh, in the middle of the night. And it's interesting to try to keep an open mind and not let the judgments and the perceptions uh, cloud that experience, because perception tends to move in a particular way, and it establishes judgments and filters, which then shape the subsequent acts of perceiving. And this is a kind of confirmation bias. So, like, if there's a small animal rustling in the middle of the night, and uh, my mind starts to think it might be the cougar, uh, then immediately the mind is set up to sort of confirm or deny that. Like, it's hard to think it might be something else at that moment. The mind is already kind of moving to this confirm or deny mode, and as it moves into confirmation, uh, it's filtering in a way that moves towards like some judgment approaching certainty. And so counterfactuals are dismissed, or it's really difficult to keep an open mind. Now, in listening to our internal process, especially our our self-dialogue, all the nuances of selfing and self-judgments, uh, and the various landscape of our emotional life, that becomes another kind of interesting exercise in listening. Various thoughts about myself, about my capacities, about who I am, about who I really am. Certain emotions, feelings, impressions, and thoughts are judged more real than others. And it can be very difficult to, again, take this kind of posture of don't know mind, just very open, not attaching, not identifying, but just listening. This is a useful word for this is maybe. My friend Sister Mon likes to say this a lot up at Birkin. Maybe. Or maybe so. Or we'll see. There are certain words that kind of help stabilize and slow down that kind of race to judgment, that race to solidify things, and the proclivity to identify and attach in particular. There's something about the effort too in just trying to listen in any kind of way, listen to another person deeply, to really try to hear what it is they're expressing in its fullness. Not just the words, not even just the words and the non-verbals, but the whole expression of their being in dialogue or speech. But also just listening. It takes what one needs, like a kind of like deep listening. It requires a heightened sense of mindfulness and awareness. But there also is what we might call some sort of a spiritual skill or wisdom and a kind of strength of mind to kind of listen in a very open and deep way that I find quite interesting. And it's akin to the kind of awareness that supports uh, the movement towards singleness of mind, samadhi. And it can be just a very pleasant meditation exercise, just to sit down and establish mindfulness and attending in a very still and open way with the intent to overcome the hindrances and deepen and nurture one's ability to sort of listen deeply uh, with non-attachment and with great stillness and lucidity of mind. So those are just a few thoughts on the theme of listening and sound consciousness. I was doing a little bit of it this morning, and it's something that's come up several times in my morning meditations over the last, I don't know, couple of weeks or something that I thought might be worth reflecting on. And hopefully there's something of use there for people as a reflection, as a way to kind of stimulate our investigation in this path of practice. So let's see. I see a lot of conversations happened while I was trying to listen to that. Scroll down now and see if there's any questions. Good morning, Shelley. That's a good question. I've wondered that myself. Can you have a monk chat together with Ajahn Karunadhammo one morning? He's very camera shy, but I'll see if we can get him to agree just once to come join me. So I've thought about trying to bring other people on as well. Get the Skype working again. And maybe I could invite various monastic friends to pop in for a morning. I mean, this has been going on for I don't know how many days now. 7 days a week for a couple months. You probably would enjoy listening to some of my friends. I haven't been starting Skype up because it doesn't seem like many people are so interested in that. But if people are, let me know. I'm quite willing to do that. And some appreciation for Ajahn Amaro's rendering of Lumpur Cha's life yesterday. Glad you could catch that, Carol. I'd like to learn how to say your name. Skyming Borsklet. Looks like a Scandinavian name. If you want to send me a little audio file to Hermitage at apigiri.org, that'd be nice. How does one practice discernment in showing acts of kindness? There are those who try to take advantage of people who do kind acts. Yeah, well, it's not something you want to disregard, but don't let that be an obstacle to practicing kindness and generosity. So, and there's a few things that come to mind. Like one, there's a whole perfection in practicing generosity that includes suitability, time, place, need, the, I guess, worthiness of the person or cause that one is giving to. And I think you can kind of somewhat apply that to showing acts of kindness, although kindness is never wrong. I mean, if we're using kindness as a stand-in for loving kindness or metta, being friendly and kind, and one thing that might balance this out is, in thinking of the injunctions to practice loving kindness towards self and others or all beings, one wants to include oneself, and there does need to be some sort of discernment about what is truly kind. Like, it's not truly kind to allow yourself to be used or abused. So don't neglect that part of the calculation. So, and And there is such a thing as a kind no, or a kind refusal, or a kind avoidance. Um, there's many ways that one can practice kindness, I guess. That's what I'm saying. So, but don't let this be an obstacle to your determination to develop your ability to extend kindness to other beings unconditionally. So, well, it looks like we're just about out of time today. Oh, here's a good question that's on theme. Good morning, Donna. Is this related to Lumpur Sumedho's sounds of silence? Somewhat. Although, Lumpur has, I think, a slightly different focus on it. And I have spent sizable periods of time listening to Lumpur, talking to Lumpur, and also practicing kind of in accordance with some of his reflections on the use of the sound of silence. So yes, it's related, but I'm making kind of maybe a broader. I was kind of exploring a little, expoil, exploring it in a little more broad kind of way. So, like I am actually interested in this kind of attempt or activity just to listen to raw sound. Um, if you conceptualize like what's going on there as we understand it from modern physics and the understanding of our physiology, sound waves, moving little things in here, little ears, little hairs, little bones, connected to nerves. Um, it's particularly interesting, given how much meaning is laden into the things that we hear. So, faculty of sight's very interesting as well. But just consider that on some level, it's just radio waves striking various kinds of cells in the organ of the eye. There's all kinds of interesting things about sight too. The image is upside down, and the mind flips it right, and the mind does all kinds of things to take what we can consider as a very physical stimulation of radio waves, energy striking the organ of the eye, and then making something out of it. Just the same way this computer in front of me receives a bunch of ones and zeros and makes something out of it based on how it's been programmed, and how some of the electrical components kind of work. It's a sankhara, it's a construct, and that's also interesting, especially for the more emotionally elated sounds. The things out there that annoy you in the world, and the experience of hearing those. It's very interesting to perceive the annoyance, the emotion, to hear the reactions to it, and then strip it back to the elemental experience of hearing, uh, or an unwished for, unwanted word, somebody criticizing you or swearing at you. It's very emotionally laden experience. And it's interesting if one has the balance of mind, and I have experienced this before, where I'm just walking on my arms around or out in public and just trying to stay with the mind. And if the mind is in a very kind of fit state, sometimes somebody says something and I hear it, I understand the import of it or something, but it doesn't necessarily provoke what one might expect from being called that. So, yeah, I like your comment here, Carol. I've been using listening in meditation lately. I find it really settling. I find it very settling. It's a very interesting object for meditation. And Adil, once I was really into my sit when I suddenly heard as if someone was walking downstairs. I was home alone, so I couldn't help but get agitated about the burglars that roam around in the vicinity. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. I've always been overly sensitive to hearing things in the night, like ever since I can remember being very young. Like most of my childhood, I shared a room. In fact, all of my childhood, I shared a room with my older brother. And I don't know how many times I'd wake him up in the middle of the night, certain that somebody had broken into the house, and try to get him to wake up, listen, take it seriously, and confirm my perceptions, which he never did. Uh, and Dantika, good morning, Dantika. The Mulapariyaya Sutta, the root of existence. It's interesting that I read it just last night, and a lot is explained there about an open mind that you were talking about. I know that sutta fairly well, but the connection doesn't leap to mind right now. Maybe I need to go back and look at that. You want to point out a particular passage, Dantika? It might save me some time. And good morning, Marilyn. Very nice comment here. Yes. Maybe if more of us listened more and more deeply to each other, we will be able to make the best of this difficult situation we're in. Yeah, I think that's true. And it's something that worries me. The drift to be locked in our own ideological worlds. I think it's very difficult to listen deeply. One has to have certain maturity about one's self and one's conscious experience. It's difficult. Attachment gets in the way. Attachment to views and beliefs is something that gets a lot of airplay in the Buddhist teaching and just how obstructive it is. It's difficult to have an open mind and be sensitive to really listening to another. Mm. Good morning, Linda. I find it very interesting that we know we can feel when someone's truly listening and how present they are. Mm. It's nice. Yeah, it really is nice. I'm not the foremost listener, but I do try sometimes. We have a community meeting at our main monastery at Baigiri, and when we first started having these meetings, and it's really just a interpersonal, like a meeting that's focused on how people are doing in the community and sharing disappointment and appreciation and checking in with each other. And they hold these meetings once every 2 weeks. And I remember when we first started those, we tried to draft up some guidance for them, and there was a lot of encouragement to try to not meditate, keep your eyes open, and practice listening and active listening, like not just sit there impassively, but relax. And um, there's a portion of the meeting where we're just kind of going around and individuals can speak, and we're not reacting or engaging in any dialogue at that moment or something. And for years, I found those meetings very useful to try to develop and practice my skill of setting aside the various habits of mind that obstruct deeply listening to another person. And it's difficult. Uh, one's kind of biases and perceptions and one's own internal um, interests and values. Uh, there's we're not just good at selfing, and we're good at othering too. And that's a deep, that's a profound obstruction to deeply listening to another person. Um, we have a certain concept of who they are, and that creates not just bias, but that creates a kind of inner monologue that's commenting and coloring uh, what it is that we're hearing and perceiving in another person when they're talking with us. And if one can relax that and suspend that, it feels like a real gift to oneself and others. So, all right, friends, I've run a bit long today. I hope nobody's late for work. So, have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow morning for morning coffee. So, thank you.